Hello, this is the Tepid Coder. In this video, I want to talk about an actual use case for a Variadic C++ template. And the best thing that came to my mind was using Sqlite. First, I want to show how you might use it just using plain C, and then I want to expand it into using C++ Variadic templates for insertions, so you can see how much easier it is. So let's do that. First of all, Sqlite3 comes with GW on Windows. At least it was packaged with my installation of it. So let's just first see if we can use that. It should be like Sqlite3 open, I think. We're going to do some database.dat, I'll call it, and I'll say Sqlite3 close, or tb for database. Sqlite3 pointer db equals null pointer. Now, if you don't know what Sqlite3 is, essentially, it's a database API that lets you create tables. These tables can have different columns in it, like maybe you want to have a user table with a username, an address, an email address associated with the user, maybe their age, whatever. It could be a phone number, anything in there. And this will let you actually select things from that database table and get any number of records that match some category, like anybody who has an email starting with a J, for example. You can search for things like that, and you can automatically take all of the records that are stored in whatever order they were written in any order you want. So you can actually alphabetize things. You can group things by different categories, right? You can sort by people who, how do I word this? You can sort by people's names, but you can also group by their age or something first. It lets you do all of that with very little code, really. So it's kind of a nice thing to know if you don't already know it. You should definitely pick up some kind of SQL language, whether it's going to be MySQL, MS SQL, MariaDB, PostgreSQL, or Sqlite. My personal preference for small projects is Sqlite3, but for any big projects I try to always use MariaDB. Your preference may vary. Not a huge fan of MS SQL. I think it's kind of annoying. I don't like all the brackets, and it doesn't have, at least last time I used it, it didn't have regular expressions as an option. Anyway, so I'm trying to open a database here. I need to pass it a reference to my database pointer. That way I can reassign where this points from null pointer to somewhere else. It's valid. I can say if not db, so if it didn't actually fill my pointer with something valid, I'll say standard C error. Error. And Sqlite's pretty good about giving you descriptive error messages. So I'm going to say Sqlite3 error msg db. It'll give me an error message relating to that database context. Okay, and I just used IOStream, so I need to do that. Include anything else. I think that's probably good for now. I'm going to open up another terminal instance here. Okay, I'm going to say decode tepid coder. I'm going to say g++ test.tp out test. I need to link it against Sqlite3. So I could do it this way. Okay, what is it here? Line 10, missing a semicolon. Okay, come on. That's not what I want. 10. Right. Seems like semicolons when I'm doing cout is my kryptonite, or C error in this case. Okay, let's try that. Alright, so it's not happy with that. Undefined reference. Even though I'm linking it against Sqlite3. That's interesting. If I do this, lib Sqlite3.a. Really? Is that right? I'm including Sqlite3.h, right? Sqlite3.h. Yeah? Okay. Well, just to be sure here, what if I do this? Now it's happy. It was just the wrong order. So if I do this, it should have created that database. So I do dir some database.dat. You can see right here. Now I've actually already made that instance. I was going to show that over here. If I do c:\msys64 ming gw64, and then I do bin Sqlite3. There we go. Now I can do .open. I can say decode tepid coder and with some database dot dat. Now I can do dot schema. You can see I've already made a table in here. It's a table called users. It has a name. It's of type text, which means I can have any number of characters in it. Probably I should do a varchar in there, which means it's a variable number of characters, and I could set how many is the max in parentheses. So I could have up to like 50 characters or something for the name. But in this case, I just set any number, because I don't really care. I'm using this locally only. Age is integer type. SQLite's kind of interesting. You can't really just say this is only an 8-bit integer, or this is a 64-bit integer, it's signed or unsigned. It just kind of lets you arbitrarily pick a type with air quotes, but when you actually put it into the database using functions, it will kind of decide how to store it based on the type that you bind to a query. And if you can use less bits for storage, it will. So anyway, I got a real, which is also like it's basically a double. But if you have like a real, it can also sometimes be a bit bigger than a double can hold, depending on how it's implemented in the database. The ID is an integer. It's a primary key and an auto increment. So every time I add a row, I don't actually specify the ID when I make a new record. I just specify these things, and the ID is automatically created for me. It'll always start at 1 in any kind of SQL variation, and 0 is considered like an invalid ID. So it'll be 1, then 2, then 3 as you create rows. Let's see if I have any data in here real quick. I can do select everything. Stars means everything. All these columns. I see. From the table name, users. You don't have to put it in backticks, but I do. Like the accent marks, like basically a tilde, but unshifted. Can semicolons how you end the statement. So I have something in here called better coder. I could insert the new record, like insert, I'll say into users, table name. I give it the fields I want to insert into, so like stir name. I want to insert an age, and I want to insert a double height. And I'm going to put into it values. For string, you have to use apostrophes. I'll say the tepid coder. And for the age, I'll say 77. For the height, I'll say 0.07. Why not? Okay, so it's not happy. I'll put value instead of values. There we go. Now it's happy. So if I do select everything from users, there it is, tepid coder. 77 years old. Got a height of 0.07 of an inch. And it's record ID number 8 in here. Alright, so let's actually show how I might insert a new record into the database using Sqlite3. So I'm going to need a couple of functions here. First of all, I need an Sqlite3 STMT. It's a statement. It equals null pointer by default. I have to do something like Sqlite3 prepare. I think it's v2 I need. So we're going to fill that in a second. I'm also going to need something like Sqlite3 bind text. I'm going to need bind in64 and bind double, I believe. Okay, so for each of these, after I have a statement, I can say the statement I want to bind it to. I can say the one based index where the column is going to be that I'm binding it to. So when I actually make a statement here, it's going to be something like const char lpsc query, let's call it, equals. I'll make it a raw string. Oops. Well, I guess that would work, but I'll use pound sign. I'm going to say insert into users. Alright, I'm going to say it was stir name. I had I64 age. And I had double height, I believe. I could say values. I could put question mark. It's a placeholder. Alright. So now what this is going to do is these values that have question marks right here, they're actually going to be replaced with the values that I specify. I can bind arguments to each of these question marks. So the first thing I'm doing is text, so I need a text first. I'm going to bind that. And these columns that I mentioned, you can imagine them as being each of these columns right here that are being listed. I'm really binding it to the first column here, the first question mark, second question mark, and third. It's one based. Okay, so now I have the statement that I'm binding it into. I have the one base index. This is going to be the first one. The N64 is going to be the second one. And this is going to be the third one, STMT3. And then the actual value I want to put in there. For text and for blobs like any kind of binary random data I want to stick in there as any size. Text is pretty similar to that. But I'm not going to do blobs right now. I'm just going to do like strings. I'm going to do integer numbers and decimal numbers. So for binding text, what I can do is I can say the actual text I want to bind. I'm going to say some dude, and I'm going to say -1 here. If you do -1, it's going to determine the size in bytes based on the first 0 it finds. And this does support by default, if you use text, UTF-8 text, which is basically an extension of like the ASCII character set you'll see if you go to like character map. So it'll work with like basic, just like chars, but it also works with any kind of like Unicode that's in UTF-8. That's kind of nice. But you also have to pass this some kind of function to free the string once you're done with it. If you want Sqlite to free the string for you after you pass it. So you could pass it some kind of reference and then tell it how to actually free that with a callback function. But if you don't want to do that, you can say Sqlite static, which I think is basically just null pointer in the background. But it'll tell it not to do anything to destruct that string. It's letting you manage it instead. Okay, now the number I want it to bind, let's say, is 17, just some integer. In fact, I'll make it -17. This person won't be born for 17 years, and their height's going to be 99.2 feet. Right? Okay, so I'm binding text, I'm binding an integer, I'm binding a double, and then what I have to do is I have to actually, what do I say? Actually, I prepare the statement, I bind stuff to it, and then I run it. So let me fill out the prepare call here. I'm going to say int I ret equals. In fact, I tested this wrong over here too. It should be int. Like I ret for return value. So if I ret not equals Sqlite, okay, I should have done that. Then it's an error. And if it's an error, I want to return to the OS. Okay. I don't need to redefine this. Okay. So now when I prepare it, I'm going to say the DB context that I created, easy passed, and then the actual query, LPSC query, let's say, that I want to run, -1, so read from this until the first 0 is hit, the null terminator. Okay? So until null terminator is reached. Okay, and then after that I'm going to say null pointer. I also need a reference to statement pointer, so I can redirect where this points, so I have an actual valid statement. This right here would redirect a char double pointer, so it's like basically this, you're referencing a char pointer like that to reference the first character after the end of the query that was parsed. So you can imagine each of these queries end with a semicolon, right? So it would be the first character after that semicolon. So if you had multiple queries you wanted to run, you could stack them into one long string. So you'd have insert this, semicolon, and then you could have more stuff like select whatever, ... or another insert or whatever else, and it would just keep pointing to the character after the statement ends. So you can just chain those statements. Now I'm not doing that here, so I'm just putting a null pointer, and they're not going to try and tell me what the next character would be. Okay, so if this doesn't work, if I ret equals, or not equals, let's say, Sqlite, okay. So if it didn't equal okay, then it failed. I'm going to say Sqlite3 close database. I really should be sticking that in a class object, because then I wouldn't have to worry about constantly, what am I saying? Constantly closing things and freeing things whenever something goes wrong. Okay, so Sqlite3 finalize needs to be called on a statement once you're done with it. And when you actually want to use the statement after you bound stuff to it, so I prepared it like here so I can use it. I bind variables to it so I can actually put stuff into the database. But then when I want to actually run the statement, I do Sqlite3 step on the statement. Okay, and then I ret equals this if I ret does not equal Sqlite row, or I ret, or no, and I should say, it doesn't equal that, and it doesn't equal Sqlite done. Then there was some kind of error. Sqlite3 step failed with message, whatever. I'll put the message in here. Alright, that's Sqlite3 error MSG, the database handle. Okay. Otherwise that did work. So let's say otherwise. Cout. A new row was inserted into the database's users table. Okay, let's try and build and run that. Actually, I want to clear that first. Okay. Oh, I didn't put the underscore there. Okay. Okay, a new row was inserted. So let's test that, see if that worked. And look, some dude. -17, 99.2. So there we go. If I do dot schema, it should be age was -17, and the height was 99.2. Something. Is it feet? Is it inches? Is it centimeters? Millimeters? Who knows? Okay. Anyway, that was interesting. That's a way we can do this, right? Now, I've already coded the different way we can do this using C++. So I'm going to drag that over here. Boom. So, in this version, instead of having to bind these things, I'm using a Variadic template. And all the things that get bound basically automatically detect the type. If it's a floating point, it'll bind a double. If it's an integer, it'll bind an 64. If it's a const char pointer, it'll bind a text thing here. And I could do another thing too for like else if, you know, const expression std is same, the type, comma, std string, or like maybe const that reference or something. Whatever, you know, I could do the same exact thing. And I'll see if that works real quick. Let's see if I can actually build and run that. So instead of this, what did I call that? It was Sqlite example CP. So Sqlite example, Sqlite example. Okay, in function, line 50. Using template arguments. 50. Oh, that's the wrong one. Line 50. Okay. Do I have string included? I don't. Let's actually include string before I get too crazy with this. Come on. Okay, so on line 60 now, missing template arguments before the opening. Oh, funny. Line 60. Come on. 60. So we're gonna say needs to be an angle bracket there because I'm using a template. It's that : value. Jeez. What am I doing? Come on. So now I can do Sqlite example. Alright, you can see it did stuff. So it's happy using that as an option. Anyway, what I'm actually doing here in this one is I'm saying run a query. I'm going to insert name as a text, integer, age, double, height. Okay, this actually creates the table here. In this query, I'm passing no template arguments to it, which is fine because when I run this, it checks to see if I'm passing any packed arguments in this. If there aren't any, it's not going to bind any query arguments, and it's just going to prepare the statement and step through it. That's completely valid. And it's going to get some kind of result from it, assuming that it's going to get some kind of a numerical value. And if it doesn't, you know, whatever, I don't care, I can just discard that. Kind of incorrect in this case, creating a table, but whatever, doesn't really matter. The next thing I do is I insert into the users the name, the age, height. Here it is, the name, age, height as template arguments. Now you can see over here, I'm actually passing these as arguments. And it's detecting automatically this is a const char star, right? This is const char pointer. This is an int type. And this is a double. Actually, technically it's a float. Float, because it's got an F at the end here. But that's still, if you do standard, you know, is floating point or whatever, will detect float and double. So that's what's happening with that. Floating point. Yeah, it's floating point. So that's pretty cool. This means I don't have to worry about knowing the type and calling the bind text and all these arguments each time I want to bind something, right? I also don't need to know, like, is it int64 or is it a double? I can automatically just do this at compile time even, because it's constant expression. So it's not like it's actually doing a test at runtime to find out what type of argument it needs to bind. and then binding that conditionally. It's literally just building this and generating the code for me at compile time, so it's super fast. And it's also safer because I don't have to depend on binding the right type. I might change my mind and have something be a double instead of an integer later if I need to have, like, I don't know, age is like 5.5, you know, instead of just 5 or instead of 6. So anyway, I'm going to have this code posted on my GitHub, just like the rest of the code, in case someone wants to play with it. In the case that you'd want to do something like pull from the database, take something out, it's a bit more complex because you might have something like an integer as one of your column members. You might have something like a double as one of your column members. And you're going to want to basically do the reverse, have a variadic function that takes a bunch of arguments that are going to be references to get data pulled into them. And maybe I'll do a continuation of this video where I actually build that and demonstrate it. But if you like what you saw so far, give it a thumbs up. So maybe subscribe for more content. And if you have any comments, suggestions, criticisms, I'd love to read them. So please do post those. I haven't really gotten a lot of engagement with the videos lately, which has kind of surprised me. Usually people have a lot of opinions about how to code things. So I don't know. If I could ever get a high volume of them, it'd be cool to have some kind of like a community built around this kind of stuff. Maybe have a Discord server or something. People can chat about coding and new interesting libraries and things they find. I think that'd be kind of cool. Anyway, I will catch you guys later. Have a great day and happy coding.